Congressman Paduan said. May I know if we're going to invite again those social bloggers?
Well, it's a pleasure of the body for those who have been invited and have not written us any excuse letter. It's up to the body.
To me, Mr. Chair, to me, Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
let us invite them again. If they don't show up or make an excuse letter, then I'll make a motion that we issue a show cause order on them.
So there's a manifestation by Congressman Abante that those who have not written any excuse letter will be invited again in the next hearing. Actually, hindi ito motion, but it's a procedure that is being governed as, no? So, doon sa mga resource persons na hindi po nakarating, na hindi nagpadala ng mga excuse letter, you are being invited again in the next hearing. And for those who have written an excuse letter, what's the pleasure of this body on the excuse letters that they have sent us? Because they have written us letters.
Mr. Chairman, kasi po, in our procedure, depende po sa content ng excuse letter, if it is valid or not. That's why, I suggest, kaya lang, tumatagal tayo dito, I suggest sana na we will discuss each and every excuse letter. Kasi magkaiba pong reason at saka content ng letter. Diba? For example, in the case of the person that was mentioned by Congressman Abante, ganun po yung sagot niya. Shall we invite her, babae ba? Shall we invite her again? Or is she a show cause order? For me, Mr. Chairman, that is offensive and we should also issue a show cause order for her. And we will not just invite her in the next hearing, we will issue a show cause order for that person. Mr. Chairman.
According sa, okay, thank you so much for that, Congressman Paduano. According sa Section 9 of our rules, witnesses have been granted more than two postponements of appearance before the committee without justifiable cause. So can issue a show cause order because wala silang justifiable reason.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Congressman Ako, please.
we must distinguish the resource person who was invited but did not offer any excuse from the resource person who was invited but came up with a letter. So why should we treat them the same? According to our protocols, as we have done in the previous committee hearings, those invited persons who did not offer any excuse, the next order is for them, for the committee to issue a show cause order to explain why. And for those people who offered an excuse for their absence, it's up for the committee to determine whether the excuse is acceptable or not. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I think we have so many excuse letters that were given to us by the COMSEC.
Mr. Chair, particularly,
Yes.
the excuse order, the excuse letter of this Miss Elizabeth Joey Cruz. She said, I know that the time of the committee is precious and I am coming from deep concern on prudent utilization of public resources. Mr. Chair, this is contemptible. This is not respecting this committee. How dare she would say the prudent utilization of public resources. I therefore make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we issue a show cause order on this Elizabeth Joey Cruz. I move therefore, Mr. Chair.
So there's a motion to issue a show cause order to that resource person. What's the name? Elizabeth Cruz, and there was a second motion. And the objection, hindi natin sa motion is now, yun po yung merong excuse letter. And there's still a lot. Like example, yung kay Sean Wayne, kay Maui Spencer, kay Eden Garcia. But you have to read the content of their excuse letter. Like for example, one of these, you want to to move on this, or you want to discuss this on a later part of the discussion? Or you want to have an omnibus motion with all of this, But there are excuse letters which are valid. Like, for example, this personality, nasa Singapore siya. So, katulad ito, out of the
Nagtago sa
country,
Singapore.
si Maui Spencer, wala din there in our country yet.
Sumawi.
Nasa Singapore siya for vacation.
Tago sa Hong Kong.
So, I think, excuse
Nung
yung,
una niyo mapalitan, nag-Hong Kong.
yung Attorney
Tapos,
Piles,
nung magkaroon
sige.
ng petsa, tago na. Ang kabila ng
After
Singapore.
discussion with my lawyers, isa-isa na natin ito kung gusto nyo. Okay, after the discussion with my lawyers, I will inform you that I won't be attending the hearing today because the objective of the hearing is an attempt to curtail the people's right of expression. So, kay Joe Lapines,
With that, excuse letter, Mr. Chairman, I move it according and I move to you as issue as your course order for that. June appearance, Mr.
okay,
Chairman.
so there's a motion ko, issue of office order to this research person. Any second motion? Second, there's a second motion. Any objection? Hearing none, the said motion is now approved.
You know, Mr. Chair, if I may,
Go ahead.
you know, Mr. Chair, para lang doon sa mga nanonood, no, ito pong hearing na ito ay hindi para kitilin o isuppress yung freedom of speech nila. Wala mo kaming ganong layunin. Ang layunin po natin dito ay gawa ng polisiya ang paggamit ng social media platforms. Dapat po meron tayong disiplina, meron tayong code of conduct, meron tayong ethics sa paggamit nitong social media. Hindi yung pagbukas mo ng social media, magmumura ka. Meron dyan, nagso-social media, nagbablog, walang ginawa araw-araw kundi manawagan ng kaguluhan sa ating bansa, nananawagan ng people power, nananawagan ng kudeta. Yung ba ay tama, Mr. Chair? Ang punto lang natin dito is magkaroon tayo ng ganitong regulasyon o regulatory policy para kagaya po ng mga broadcasters, meron po silang KBP. Kagaya po ng mga manunulat sa dyaryo, meron po silang NUJP. They're all bound by rules and regulations. But in this social media, the use of social media platforms, unfortunately, wala po tayong ganyan sa ngayon. At hindi po pwede na gawin pong rason ng mga yan na meron tayong freedom, na tinekertail natin yung freedom of speech nila. Huwag niyo pong lokohin ang taong bayan. Wala hong curtailment o suppression ng freedom of speech dito. Kaya nga kayo inimbita rito eh. Diba? Kaya kayo inimbita dito para magpagpahayag din kayo. Hindi po ba yan ay tamang freedom of expression? Eh ba't kayo nagpapadala kayo ng mga sulat na hindi kayo pwede kasi hindi kayo naniniwala sa layunin ng pagdinig na ito? Eh, wag po kayo magtago sa mga ganyan. Ang tatapang nyo, sabi nga ni Congressman Abante, in the advent of social media, suddenly Filipinos become political analysts. They become journalists. They become experts. Eh, we need your wisdom. Diba? Kayo, ang gagaling nyo magpuliksa eh. Ito nyo gawin para nang sa ganun, makagawa tayo ng isang polisiya na hindi po maabuso ito. Eh, ngayon, nandiyan kayo sa social media. Kung mag-retire kayo, wala na kayo, hindi na kayo nagbablog. Paano kaya yung mga susunod na mga vloggers? Kailangan po ang layunin natin dito. Kaya huwag kayong magdahilan na hindi kayo nagpupunta rito dahil hindi kayo pupunta rito kasi hindi kayo naniniwala sa layunin ng investigasyon na ito. We want to craft a policy, a remedial legislation, so that there will be discipline and code of ethics in the practice and use of our social media platform, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. 7 na lang naman pala to. So, tapusin na natin yung kailan. Ito may excuse letter din si Mark Anthony de la Cruz Lopez. I was supposed to stand in front of this committee today in what has been asserted as inquiry on fake news, peddlers, narco-vloggers, and Pogo-funded vloggers in need of legislation. I would have loved to really open up and tell you my story on how I evolved from being an ordinary citizen. Mahaba po siya, mga 5 pages siya. Pero tinitingnan ko, you see Mr. Fernandez and Barbers, I reiterate that I I am a citizen of the Republic and I actually understand that the premise of your so-called inquiry is without basis, nor cannot understand on solid legal ground. I therefore invoke my rights as provided for in the Constitution and decline your invitation. So, mahaba po yung kanyang letter and I cannot understand fully, but this is the content of the letter. So, what's the pleasure of the body?
Mr. Chairman, once again, the letter, as you said, that was sent to this committee is not valid. I move to issue a show cause order to that invited guest.
Okay, so there's a motion to issue a show order to Mr. Mark Anthony Lopez. Any second the motion?
Second.
Any objection? Hearing none? Yes, the said motion is not approved. Okay, ito naman galing ni Atty. Trixie Angeles. I respectfully decline this invitation as I question the legality of the inquiry as well as the proposed legislation for being violative of the constitutional guarantee of free speech.
Is she a lawyer? Is she a lawyer?
Yes, Atty. Trixie.
A lawyer?
I think, attorney. So what's the pleasure of the body?
Mr. Chairman, I might have two motions, Mr. Chairman. First motion, Mr. Chairman, is to issue a show cause order to attorney what?
Trixie Angeles.
Attorney Angeles.
Show cause.
That is my first motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, about the...
I second the motion.
Duly seconded. Any objection? Hearing none, the said motion is approved.
My second motion, Mr. Chairman, is for the legal department of this House to study if ever there is a violation because he is an officer of the court. And he should respect the constitutional duty of Congress. And question of legality, Mr. Chairman, I respectfully move that we will consult the legal department of this House for a possible disbarment case against Atty. Trixie Angeles po. So po, Mr. Chairman.
The consensus by directed. No, it's a motion. So there's a motion.
Second.
Wait. Your motion is to ask the
The legal department for a possible disbursement case against Atty. Trixie Angeles.
So there's a motion cited by Congressman Eduardo. Any second the motion? Duly seconded. Any objection? Hearing none, the said motion is now approved. About Richard Mata, thank you for your invitation. I just received this yesterday, just a day before the event. I consulted my lawyer and was advised not to attend. The late invitation plus the agreed purpose of the event is support the freedom of speech. So, what's the pleasure of this body?
The same thing with the others, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a motion to
But I think we have
issue of show of order now.
there's a motion. Any second the motion? Do you second any objection? Hearing none, the said motion is now approved. About the Aaron Peña. While I initially wanted to accept, I would like to respectfully decline your invitation to share my knowledge on matters that were raised by Representative Ace Barbers in his privilege speeches. Last year, after a series of consultation with my lawyers, I would like to categorically state that I'm neither paid by phone operators nor drug lords, and so my knowledge is not used for the goal of the joint committee. Same thing. Motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to issue a show cause order for...
There's a motion to issue a show cause order to this person, and second motion. Second motion. Duly seconded. And objection, hearing none, the said motion. And Gisette Chu. This is reference to your invitation to the joint inquiry congressional hearing on social media. After careful consideration, I would like to respectfully turn down your invitation due to these following reasons. Mahaba po yung reasons. 4 pages. And sa nababasa ko po, ang tema niya ay justification of the laws protecting their rights. So I think, what's the pleasure again? I think it's not about health reasons or whatever. It's also justifying not to be present on today's hearing.
Once again, Mr. Chairman, I move to issue a show cause order
There's a
for
motion to issue
invited guest.
show cause order to Ms. Lisette Chu, and this was duly seconded. Hearing no objection, the said motion is now approved. About the Sean Wayne Chalong excuse as well. No health issues and not out of the country. So I think same. No, it's not out of the country. So, nag-decline lang siya. And this goes also to Miss Ethel Garcia, para yun ang last natin. So, dalawa po sila, same reason almost.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we issue so also therefore both the invitees that was mentioned by the chairman. So
There's
move,
a
Mr.
motion
Chairman.
to issue shows order to Miss Ethel Garcia and Shanway. Duly seconded. Any objection? If not, the said motion is now approved. So now we will be...
Mr. Chairman, just one last
Yes.
admin.
11:30 na. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the committee has received a letter coming from the Philippine Entertainment Portal, and they are requesting for their presence to be invited to the next hearing, Mr. Chairman, so that we can also give some inputs with regards to the House resolution that we are tackling in today's hearing, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
so we will be inviting them over as well. There's a motion, seconded by Congressman Luisto. Any objection? There's a motion on the said motion. Any objection? There's a motion is now. Okay, punta na po tayo sa flow ng presentation natin. Kanina, sinabi po natin yung ating po by Zoom. Si Dr. Rachel Khan, Associate Dean, Youth College of Media and Communication. Pakinggan po natin yung mga taga-academic natin. Go ahead. Okay, so unahin po muna natin si Dr. Jonathan Ong, University of Massachusetts. Nandiyan po siya, via Zoom as well. So via Zoom, sige, go ahead. Sige, Dr. Ong, you are now recognized. Sige, Dr. Ong, you are now recognized. Please proceed.
Academic research and tech policy papers on social media and disinformation. Since 2016, I've collaborated with many news and nonprofit organizations in the country. Several of them are invited and present in today's hearings. I've also presented in previous hearings on fake news at the Senate related to elections as well as on foreign interference. So ang una ko pong
Dr. Jonathan Ong, for a while, we have problem with the audio. Can you refrain from speaking just yet? So, technically, it might be, increase lang po yung volume. Dr. Jonathan Ong, you can now proceed, please. We'll just try to check it out.
Alright. Can you hear me fine?
Okay,
And
go
can you
ahead,
see
go
my
ahead.
presentation?
Much better. Thank you so much.
Okay, so magandang umaga po. I'm a professor based po
Mr.
dito sa
Jonathan
Boston.
Ong,
But
Dr.
before I was a
Jonathan Ong,
professor sa
I'm
Ateneo
sorry,
de Manila,
Jonathan.
I'm a disinformation researcher and director of Sigla Research Center based po sa Manila, and I've been publishing academic research on social media and disinformation since 2016, and I've collaborated with many human rights organizations and newsrooms, some of them present in today's hearings. I've also presented at the Senate on fake news and elections, as well as on foreign interference. So, ang una ko pong layunin sa araw na ito ay magbahagi ng research on disinformation. Number two is to review trends in global context. It's important to conduct comparative research with our neighboring countries kung ano-ano na nga ba yung mga effective solutions based on other countries' direct experiences, including with legislation. Pag-usapan po natin kung paano maaaring suportahan at posibleng pondohan ng gobyerno ang iba't ibang mga interventions. Third, it's important that we share lessons of what has worked and what hasn't in the Philippine context, and what risks that researchers, journalists, and other organizations in this space have been facing. Fourth, I also wanted to share the vision of Sigla Research Center and myself as a sociologist in terms of tech justice here in the Philippine context. So my colleagues advocate for tech justice solutions that are sustainable, long-term, and aligned with our country's cultural context. So first, I wanted to share this free and open access resource for policymakers and also educators curated by Sigla Research Center. You can visit siglaresearchcenter.org and check out this research archive. Ito pong research archive collects many professors previously published research and policy papers on disinformation in influence operations. So na-publish na po siya sa iba't ibang bansa, pero na-collecto po siya dito sa research archive. Altogether, in reviewing all of them, you can learn about trends across 3 election cycles from 2016, 2019, and 2022 elections. Most recently, we have one paper that also summarizes trends across all 3. Some of you might know that as a sociologist, my specific methodology has also been focused on understanding the business of disinformation for hire. Ito po yung paano magpatakbo ng digital operations during elections and yung mga kampanya at kung ano-ano yung mga klase ng operators na kumikita ng pera from disinformation campaigning. We also include papers in this archive led by other academics such as Fatima Gao, who discussed influencer marketing and paano kumikita ng pera ang mga influencers bawat halalan using advertising technology of social media platforms. Finally, we have collected research about counter-disinformation actors in the Philippines and kung ano-ano yung mga interventions na na-implement dito sa ating bansa. So, baka may mga nakakaalam na po sa inyo itong research paper published noong 2018 entitled Architects of Network Disinformation. I was asked to share this with you again today. This research was co-authored with Jason Cabañas, and this analyzed the behind-the-scenes work of disinformation campaigns, how they are organized, the different kinds of workers involved, who sets the agenda, and who executes the campaign. So our research involved interviews with politicians, political operators, at various levels of the hierarchy. Kasama na dito mga advertising and PR specialists, influencers, fake account operators, and digital volunteers. This academic paper has also been translated as a podcast produced by Puma Podcast, where we interviewed disinformation whistleblowers. So ito po yung mga operators na nagtrabaho sa mga political campaigns, and you can hear from them directly. Maririnig nyo how they were recruited into their work at paano sila kumikita ng pera. 3 of our findings: political trolls are not tech-brainwashed, uneducated, poor voters in rural areas. Some of them are from middle-class families, and they see political trolling as just a side gig, a hustle to make ends meet. There are different kinds of workers, and we need to hold accountable the people at the top, yung mga elites in advertising and PR industries. Ibig sabihin, sana wag lang po natin habulin yung mga low-level workers, yung mga bots, but pati na rin yung mga mastermind. Pero mahirap pong gawin itong kind of research. Ang naging pangalan po sa methodology ng research na ito ay Disinformation for Hire, yung pag-aaral na paano nagiging hanap buhay, kumbaga, ang paggawa ng fake news sa industriya. So ang napag-aralan namin ay ito. Investigative research into the business of disinformation is risky and costly. It requires financial investment and also legal support. So yung mga researchers and journalists who do this are also threatened when doing this kind of risky research. It is difficult to execute because it requires the cooperation of whistleblowers. Ibig sabihin, hindi lang ito monitoring kung ano yung nakikita natin sa social media. Kailangan may ma-invite tayo na magpa-interview sa mga researcher ng mga tao na insiders talaga sa industriya. This means that we need civil society to support worker power movement building in the digital and creative industries. Kailangan ma-encourage natin sila at magkaisa mapag-usapan ng ethics or lack thereof sa industriya. So, may iba't ibang interventions na nasubukan na. So for example, codes of ethics have been attempted by legal advocacy groups like Lente, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Unfortunately, these attempts have had very little buy-in from advertising and PR agencies themselves because it threatens their ways of working and their bottom line. Thus, it has become easier to just hunt and fact-check low-level trolls and bots rather than to hold accountable itong mga masterminds. So, pag-usapan din natin ang foreign interference. And it's important that we review prior research. Of course, it's important to invest in cybersecurity monitoring of foreign interference. Ito po yung pag-track ng mga bot accounts operated overseas and how they interfere on wedge issues, such as how Chinese accounts were discovered by Facebook's own investigation as pushing CCP propaganda around the West Philippine Sea. However, we also need to fund local investigative research that can probe the transnational labor networks to expose itong mga financial transactions during campaigns, especially during elections. So for example, during the 2019 elections, we found at least one example of a Chinese mainland business tycoon funding a local politician's digital operations for a mayoral race. Dahil may personal business interests siya sa lugar na iyon at naisip niya na matulungan itong local politician. This should also count as foreign interference and ways of circumventing campaign finance regulation in the country. So, kasama na din sa pag-discuss ng foreign interference, we need to understand how it can come from many different countries, including from our allied countries, such as the United States. Reuters journalists last year exposed the Pentagon as seeding anti-vaccine memes in our country at the height of COVID. We need to pursue unanswered questions from this expose, including identifying possible local Filipino collaborators who participated in the translation and dissemination of this US-funded disinformation campaign. So I'm almost at the very end of this presentation. I just wanted to highlight research from other neighboring countries about the risks of top-down government legislation against fake news. So it's important to recognize that many human rights organizations and international legal scholars have raised alarm about the global trend of anti-fake news laws being used as quote-unquote weaponized lawfare. Ang sabi po ng maraming eksperto ay ang mga batas ukol sa fake news ay karanasan nagagamit in an inconsistent and arbitrary fashion, often used by incumbent politicians and governments to target activists, critics, journalists, and opposition parties. So kahit mabuti ang intensyon ng batas, kung hindi specific at transparent ang batas at ang mga implementers na ito, top-down regulation can actually do more harm than good. Kaya nga, kahit UNESCO, nakaaway siya ng mga civil society organizations around Southeast Asia in 2023. So nagalit ang mga civil society organizations sa UNESCO for trying to encourage governments to have control of social media content. They had 3 objections. In effect, this would be rubber stamping local overregulation, it would embolden authoritarian regulators, and it would incentivize platforms to comply with illegitimate government requests. So these objections are not new. Back in 2018, the Center for the Protection of Journalists spoke out against how journalists have been imprisoned on charges of fake news spreading. It's important to note that we should consider different kinds of legislation, hindi lang po imprisonment and fines penalizing social media users. Pwede din po ay legislation focused at big tech corporation na focus siya on content corrections. So mandating big tech to implement content corrections, or number 2, administrative compliance measures for participating in transparency mechanisms with independent researchers. So I'm almost at the final slide, and so now, given the risks of top-down legislation that might do harm than good, yung advocacy ng Sigla Research Center is kailangan civil society-driven ang lunas sa fake news, and kailangan angkop sa ating konteksto. We need to have full awareness of risks of regulatory capture and overreach. So these are four very practical solutions that would be more civil society driven rather than top-down and overreaching. First is to broaden the focus beyond content takedowns. Government should be supporting independent research and civil society to mitigate local businesses of disinformation for hire. So kahit meron pong examples of foreign interference, mas typical pa rin itong local disinformation.